With the Russian invasion of Ukraine continuing, there's no sign that the Western-imposed sanctions on the Russian airlines are going to let off anytime soon. So in today's video, I'm going to have a look at what kind of options these airlines have and whether or not the Russian aircraft manufacturing can pick up the slack and actually keep these Russian airlines flying. We're going to have a look at both the short-term, medium-term and long-term possibilities, and it turns out it's quite fascinating, so stay tuned. In the short term, the Russian airlines are just going to have to work with whatever they have, and this means, to a large extent, their Western aircraft fleet. Some of these aircraft have been nationalized, stolen from the leasing companies, and some of them were owned outright before this war began. Now, the problem, obviously, as I pointed out in some of my earliest videos on this subject, which you can check out later on, is that they are not receiving any new aircraft, nor are they receiving any spare parts or any help with maintenance of these aircraft. So this means that eventually these aircraft are not going to be usable. Now, the Russian airlines have been cut off from a large part of their flying network, which means that they're likely sitting with much more aircraft than they actually need at the moment. And this is going to keep them afloat for a couple of months, possibly a year, while they put some of these aircraft on the ground and start cannibalizing them from parts in order to maintain some of the other aircraft flying. The problem though is that that won't work for very long. Even if they do get access to the black market like North Korea and Iran has been doing, the Russian aviation business is just so much bigger. So the black market will not be able to source the amount of parts needed to keep this amount of Western aircraft flying and legal. The other thing that they can do is reaching out to friendly countries and see if they can source spare parts from them. But like I pointed out in my previous video on this subject, it's very unlikely that any country will take on the risk of sourcing parts that are under sanctions to Russia, because that could potentially put those countries under sanctions as well, which is definitely not something that they would want. This means that eventually there will be just fewer and fewer Boeings and Airbuses available to these Russian airlines. And in order for them to keep flying, they have to come up with a different solution. Now, what we have seen is that they have actually started to dust off their old Ilyushin 96 aircraft, which is an internal Russian aircraft, but there just aren't enough of them. They cannot possibly take up the slack when the Western fleets are starting to run out. This brings us to the medium-term future for the Russian airlines, and at a first glance, it looks like there might be some quite good options for them here. If we start, for example, with the Sukhoi SSJ100 Superjet. This is an aircraft that's approximately the same size as an Airbus A220, largely used for domestic short to medium haul routes. And the Russian airlines are already using quite a few of these Superjets. The problem though is that even though this is a Russian airliner, it is built on a lot of Western parts. So the avionics, the fly-by-wire system, the hydraulics, some of the actuators for the different flight controls, they're all provided by Western firms. These aircraft have been assembled in Russia for quite a while, which means that the Russian partners to these Western companies probably have a fairly big stockpile of parts that they can use in order to continue to build and service the Sukhoi Superjet for quite a while, but we haven't even gotten to the biggest problem, and that's the engines. Currently, the Sukhoi Superjet is powered by two PowerJet SAM 146 jet engines. These jet engines are a joint venture between Safran and NPO Saturn, which is the Russian counterpart. Safran is the one that is creating the core of the jet engine and most of the controlling system for it as well. It's actually very similar to the core of the CFM56 engine, which is the same engine as we are using on the Boeing 737NG. The Western sanctions will make this corporation impossible to continue, which eventually will mean that the Sukhoi Superjet is going to run out of spare parts for its engines, and when it does, it's not really certified to be using any of the Russian engines to power it. All of this together means that the Sukhoi Superjet is likely going to follow a similar path as the Boeings and the Airbuses in the Russian airlines fleet. It just might take a little bit longer for them to reach there because they have a bigger stockpile of spare parts. So that brings us to the Irkut MS-21, or as it's known in the West, the MC-21, which is a competitor to the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. The engines that Irkut and its parent company United Aircraft Corporation chose for the MC-21 are Pratt & Whitney geared turbofans, very similar to the ones that are fitted to the Airbus A320neo. Now those engines are obviously Western built as well, which means that the MC-21 is facing similar problems to the Sukhoi Superjet. But in this case, the MC-21 has actually been flown with Russian-built Aviad Vigatel PD-14 engines. The only snag here though is that the aircraft has not been certified together with these engines, even though the engines in themselves are certified. However, that's not the end of the problems, because just like with the Sukhoi Superjet, the MC-21 has a lot of Western-built systems in it, including the APU, some of the avionics, a lot of the electrics, and crucially also its state-of-the-art side stick, which is actually the first side stick built onto an airliner that is supposed to have force feedback so that one pilot can feel what the other pilot is doing with his or her side stick. Those systems already exist on private jets like the Gulfstream G500, 600 and upwards, but this will be the first time that such a system will be fitted onto an airliner. But the problem is though that that system comes from a French manufacturer. So once again, there's going to have to be a lot of Russification needed on several different components inside of the MC-21, and then those systems needs to be fully certified before the Russians can completely manufacture these aircraft in Russia. Before we continue with the next aircraft, I just want to share this with you. Whenever I travel somewhere, like last week when me and my family went to Dubai, the way that I use CuriosityStream myself is I try to find a documentary on there about the place I'm going to. So for example, we checked out the Burj Khalifa, Dubai's vertical city, and that just made the experience of going up into the Burj Khalifa so much more rewarding. It is a high quality subscription streaming service with thousands of documentaries and non-fictional stories from some of the best filmmakers in the world. If that sounds interesting to you, and I bet that it does, then go down and check out the link in the description here below, which is curiositystream.com/mentornow, and use the coupon code mentornow so they know that you're coming from my video. That will give you a whopping 25% off the annual fee, which is only $14.99 per year, which is insane value for money. So after this video, go down and check it out. So what about the Tupolev TU-214 then? This is an aircraft that has been completely built inside of Russia. It's using Russian engines, using Russian electronics, avionics, everything is Russian, and at the moment it's largely being used by Russian government authorities only. It is a fairly modern aircraft in some aspects, as in it has fly-by-wire, and not so modern in other areas where it still uses a 3-pilot cockpit with a flight engineer. But it's the size of a Boeing 757 and it could easily be turned into a passenger version, and according to Russian sources it's already being done. In this case there's no foreign parts being used at all, so the sanctions will have no impact on the production process. But here there's another small snag, and that is the production rate. Tupolev has estimated that they are going to be able to produce about 10 Tupolev TU-214 per year in the year 2025 if they start ramping up production. Just to put that into perspective, Airbus is currently producing about 45 Airbus A320neo per month, and Boeing is spitting out about 27 Boeing 737 Maxes per month. This means that if Tupolev is only able to ramp up the production to 10 units per year in 3 years from now, it is unlikely that that is going to be able to cover the need of new aircraft that is going to start happening when the Western aircraft fleets inside of Russia are starting to become grounded. If we now start to look further into the future, as in beyond the year 2025 and beyond 2030, it is very possible that Russia is going to focus most of their resources on trying to fully Russify the systems inside of their existing airliners, like the Superjet and the MC-21. But there's also been some quite advanced discussions between the Chinese COMAC organization and the United Aircraft Corporation in Russia to go together and create a new joint venture called CRAIC. Yeah, that's what they're calling it, in which they would create a joint long-haul aircraft called the CR929. And from what we've seen so far of this project, it looks like a very good-looking aircraft. It looks from the outside similar to the Boeing 787, and from cockpit mock-ups that we've seen, the cockpit looks very similar to an Airbus A350. But herein, once again, lies the problem, because this project was once again projected to be using a lot of Western aircraft parts in it. A lot of the avionics and the cockpit instrumentation would be coming from Western firms, and they were also planning to use either Rolls-Royce or General Electric engines to power this aircraft, something that looks very unlikely to happen right now. So even though in the original project they were supposed to have a flying prototype of the CR929 as early as 2023, which is next year, that's obviously not going to happen. Now, if they actually continue this project, they're going to have to remake and replace all of these Western systems in order for this aircraft to be able to be built. And on top of that, you have to factor in that there is a possibility that the Chinese might not be so interested in pursuing this joint venture together with Russia out of fear of being subjected to sanctions themselves. And even if this project would continue to go ahead and the Russians would be able to create a larger version of the Aviad Vigatel engine to power this aircraft, there is a small question about where it's actually going to fly. Is it going to fly only between Russia and China? Because this aircraft is going to have to be certified in the West as well if this aircraft is to be flying in the West. So it's likely that if this project even continues, it is going to take many, many years for it to reach fruition. So what's the conclusion out of all of this then? Well, the conclusion is that if Russia continues its war in Ukraine and these sanctions from the West continue, it's going to be very, very hard for Russia to maintain its airline industry. Just as easy as that. Their Western aircraft are going to be grounded one after the other until there's none of them left, and the Russian aircraft industry at the moment is not set to be able to produce aircraft at the rate that these Western aircraft are going to start being grounded. So unless the Russians continue to fly these Western aircraft outside of the rules and regulations and effectively then letting the safety level start to drop, it is likely that there's just going to be less and less aircraft flying over the Russian skies until there is some kind of conclusion to this horrific war and the sanctions can start to be lifted and we can go back to a world where everyone works together in order to enhance flight safety and enhance the kind of connection between people again. Now, check out this video next. I think you're going to really like that one. Remember to subscribe to this new channel if you haven't already and leave a like after you. If you want to support the work that I do, then consider becoming part of my fantastic Patreon family, or you can always buy yourself some merch. Have an absolutely fantastic day and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.